A young nurse with a bright future, a brutal crime scene, and a witness pointing the finger. Was justice served, or was the real killer hiding in plain sight? This is the LaNell Barsock story. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Meghan. Look at us all patterned out today.
I know. I'm not surprised that neither one of us would wear anything with a pattern, or has, but then on the same day, we both choose to wear something.
Yeah, I was always under the impression you weren't supposed to wear patterns on camera, but I think we look fine.
It's different camera circumstances, so, I mean, what are you going to do? We're running out of clothes. Anyway. So today's case is one that it probably seems straightforward, but you know those cases that begin that way until you realize something is just a bit off.
Our favorite kind of case.
Yeah, something beneath the surface, but you're just not quite sure what it is. You can't put your finger on it. Well, it's one of those.
How did you find the case?
I saw a Dateline on it.
Oh, okay.
I think I saw it a while ago, and it might have either aired again, or I'm not really sure how it came on my radar again, but I knew it. And when I connected with it again, I went, oh yeah, I really wanted to cover this case. So, I mean, this case starts with a young woman full of life, promise, and then a situation that just doesn't quite add up. The more you dig, the more unsettling it becomes. And that's the only hint I'm going to give you. For now, I'll just begin by introducing you to LaNell Barsock. 29-year-old Lenel had a bright future in front of her, as many 20-somethings do. Lenel grew up in Los Angeles, one of 5 children, and studied very hard to become a nurse. She was described by her friends as bubbly, helpful, and dedicated to her profession. One of her friends actually described he was an immigrant, and I think he came from Haiti, and said he didn't quite have money for books and a couple of things in the beginning, and she helped him out. She helped him get school supplies and other things. She was that kind of person. Her smile was also electric. You can see in pictures, bright and beaming. And while she was on her way to becoming a nurse, Lenel met a man named Louis Bonaire at her college. He had recently moved to LA as well from Haiti, and he was taking English courses at her school. The two clicked immediately and became a couple quickly. Maybe too quickly, some might say, but you remember how young love works, right, Amy?
Mm-hmm. Yes. It moves quick, and you think it's the end-all, be-all. Yep.
Well, these two dated for a few years, with Louis eventually taking a city maintenance job and Lenel working for a health center in Los Angeles.
How old are they again at this point?
She was 29, and I want to say he was around the same age.
So they're not that young. It's not really young love. It's like adult love at this point.
It's like on the cusp, but it's not it's not kid love, but it's still young enough.
Okay, yeah.
In 2009, Lenel and Louis purchased a home in Palmdale, California, which is a nice desert suburb 65 miles north of Los Angeles and with about 165,000 residents. The two had plans to marry eventually, but the happiness would not last long. On June 16, 2010, a hysterical woman rushed into the Palmdale Sheriff's Department, claiming that she had just come from her friend's house where something was very wrong. She said that she went to her friend's home, and when she entered the garage, she slid on plastic bags and fell to the floor, not realizing what she had just slid on. But after a moment, she could see that it was blood, and she reported that her friend's legs were lying next to her on the floor.
So I'm assuming this is Lenel.
That's right. Her friend was Lenel, and she was lying face up on the garage floor, deceased in a pool of blood. Upon realizing,
how traumatic.
The trauma of that. The woman, named Lorraine Austin, fled from the home and drove to the police station immediately. The police responded quickly, getting to Lenel's home, but unfortunately, Lenel was gone. So they began to process the scene and to process Lenel's body.
Where's her boyfriend?
He was not home, but we'll get there.
He was not, okay.
Nope. Lenel had a black plastic bag over her head, but underneath the bag, when they removed it, the police could see that she had been shot once in the back of the head.
Oh.
Yes. As they moved through the house, other items stood out immediately. In the laundry room, several bloody towels and blood on the floor. There were more bloody towels on the garage floor as well, and a bloody area rug taken from the living room that was wrapped up and contained plastic gloves as well as what looked like instruments for hair weaving.
Oh. Any other injuries besides the gunshot wound?
Not that they could see, no. So they have a bloody crime scene and a brutal crime committed against this young woman. But now the question is, who would do this and why? While the crime scene was being processed, investigators also began interviewing Lanelle's friend Lorraine, who had found her, because this would be their obvious starting point. According to a very distressed Lorraine, she had gone into the home looking for Lenel and found her friend deceased in the garage. We already heard that part. But she had something much more significant to share. Lorraine said that she heard a noise coming from the house when she was in the garage. And all of a sudden, she saw someone run out the door. A man. But did she recognize him was the question.
Just a quick question, Megan. Was it customary for her to just go in the garage of her friend's home?
I think her garage was open, so it was like walking in through the garage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So this man that she saw running from the home, fleeing from the home, according to Lorraine, it was Louis Bonner, Lanelle's boyfriend. Perhaps she was mistaken. After all, she was likely in shock, and she might have just assumed the man in the house would be the only man she would have known in the home. Either way, police certainly had to speak with Louis. They were going to have to...
And it would be fairly simple. I'm assuming they're going to start by seeing if he has an alibi, and that would be a fairly simple way to rule him out.
Or rule him in. So they asked Louis to come in, and he did. But before that, before we get to what Louis had to say, what would other people say about their relationship? According to friends of Lanelle's, she was growing increasingly dissatisfied with the relationship. 4 years in, and Lenel was ambitious, and she was concerned that Louis wasn't serious about a career or about his finances, which now were kind of shared finances as they had purchased a home together. The home, I might mention, was also, it wasn't quite furnished yet. It was new. So I imagine she was thinking about, this was her dream home. It was a huge 3,600 square foot, lovely home, lovely neighborhood. And I think she wanted to, make it her own. But it was more than just finances. According to Lanelle's friends, Louis was very controlling and even took her phone at times to see who she was calling. So he was monitoring her communications. Others reported that he kept tabs on her work schedule and sometimes would show up at lunch to see where she was and other activities. Shortly before the murder, the police were called to their home for a domestic disturbance. There were no charges filed as there was no evidence of a physical altercation, but A, we know that doesn't mean one didn't happen. And B, according to Lanelle's mother, this wasn't the first time. Earlier that month, after Lenel had tried to break up with Louis, he chased Lenel in his car and her car, shattering her window and scratching the side of her car. And Lenel told her mother this hysterically. And Lenel was scared, and she was ready to get out of the relationship. But the question becomes, was there more to this story? Well, the police were still speaking with Lanelle's friend Lorraine as well, who would have a lot of information. After all, she and Lenel went to high school together, and they had reconnected now that she lived near Louis and Lenel. And the police recognized that she could be a great source of information about Louis and the relationship. And they were right. Lorraine said that Louis and Lenel had been fighting a lot just prior to her murder. Now, according to Lorraine, apparently the fighting was due to an infidelity.
On whose part?
It was Lenel. So Lenel had been seeing a man on the side by the name of Ike Umana, who also worked in the field of nursing, like Lenel. Though he lived out of town, he lived several hours away. The two had been dating for several months, and Louis had found out about the relationship, and he was quite angry, as you could imagine. So much so that Ike was concerned on one occasion for Lenel's safety and called the sheriff's station to report his concerns. They responded, but there was no apparent threat. But Louis and Lenel continued to argue about Ike, according to Lorraine.
Was she planning on ending the marriage?
So they weren't married. They were in a serious relationship. And at that time, it seemed like Lenel was still committed to Lewis. But I also think she saw something in Ike, and I think she was looking for something in a partner that Lewis just wasn't giving her. However, Lewis believes that they might have been reconciling. So when he found a second phone that Lenel had that was supplied by Ike, he was quite angry about this. On the morning of Lenel's murder, Ike took this phone with him. So Lenel had said that their relationship with Ike was over and that she and Lewis were going to reconcile, but he discovers that she has this phone and that it's recently had minutes put on it.
Oh.
So he grabs the phone and he's very angry about it.
This seems to be motive, but it also might be a red herring.
Right.
Based on your intro.
Yes, it could be. So Lewis had left that morning, he grabs the phone, he comes back around 11:30 or 12, and the two are arguing again. Lenel grabs her phone back from Lewis, and then she and Lorraine go to a beauty supply store to get some products because they were going to weave her hair that day. Remember, there was hair weaving tools? And this is captured on surveillance. So this is about, I think it was about 11:30, 12 o'clock. But outside, Lewis was waiting, and he wouldn't leave until Lenel turned over that cell phone again. So fighting about this phone. Returning home again, the two resumed their argument, and Lorraine decided it was time for her to leave. She didn't want to be in the middle of this situation. She headed to a nearby park to give them some privacy, figured they would have an argument, and then she would return later on in the day. When she got back around 6 p.m., she walked into the bloody scene, and that is when she ran out. She says she saw Lewis fleeing the scene, and she went to the police station. So this brings us to why we have to talk to Lewis immediately. There's more information than just he's the boyfriend. There's some information that came from Lorraine about the relationship, and I think the police had a little bit more background information to question him with now.
Well, and she also, as an eyewitness, says that she saw him. So that's that's the biggest one.
Yes, absolutely.
Was there any surveillance cameras or anyone have like any ring cameras or anything?
No, there wasn't. Not around the homes. But the surveillance will come into play later. So hold that thought. Lewis wasn't hard to find. They actually found him at Lanelle's mother's house, Bobby. And he was happy to go to the police station for questioning, seemingly unaware of the reason they wanted him to come in. He was staying at Bobby's house because she lived closer to where he worked. So occasionally he would stay, when he had an early morning shift, he would stay at Lanelle's mother's house.
Were they not aware that she's deceased at this point?
No, they weren't aware. They were called to come in, apparently, at the same time.
And they didn't know why?
No, they didn't know why. So both Bobby and Lewis went to the police station. Mm-hmm. But Lewis still had no idea what was going on. And when detectives asked about his girlfriend, they asked Lewis where he was all day. He said that he had left home earlier to get his car fixed, but, returned to confront Lenel, as Lorraine had reported. I think he downplayed it, to be honest. He came home, they had a slight argument. But then he left and he went and met, actually, according to Lewis, he went and met Lorraine's boyfriend, who lived an hour and a half away for help with his car. And he went to various auto body places in LA to get parts for his car.
Okay, that should be easily verifiable.
Yep, okay. And after he was done, he said that he spent the night at Lanelle's mother's house, which would be easy to substantiate. She did substantiate that. But he also told the police that the relationship was a good one with no problems. So this was clearly a lie, and the police noticed something else. He had a fresh scratch across his face. He told the police that Lenel, when he had that argument earlier, she scratched him, but that it was no big deal. It was just a small spat.
But he didn't mention it earlier.
No.
Until they asked him.
Exactly.
That looks shady.
Okay. Or maybe he didn't think it was much. The detectives, either way, it wasn't looking great, and they wanted to apply a little pressure and let him know that his story wasn't quite lining up about this perfect relationship. So they mentioned Ike, and Lewis said that Ike was a friend of Lenel's and nothing more. But then they confronted him with the breakup letter.
Okay, what breakup letter are we referring to? Did I miss something?
The police found a letter in Lenel and Lewis's home that started like this. Dear Lewis, I'm leaving you for Ike. he makes more money, so you can do whatever you want to do with the house. I'm moving out of state with Ike. There's a little bit more, but the gist is goodbye. At the end, I think she mentions, it might have scratched out, I'm taking one of the TVs, but you can have everything else.
Wow. Okay, so more motive. Lot more motive.
So what would Lewis have to say about this? Well, he said he had no clue about this letter. He had never seen it. And at this point, the police told Lewis what they had not yet revealed and what Lewis might have been starting to gather by now. And that was the fact that Lenel was deceased and that she had been murdered. How did Lewis react? Well, he became hysterical, crying about losing Lenel, saying that the police had to help him find whoever did this. And he seemed pretty convincing at this point. He seemed genuinely distraught.
But he's also their primary suspect?
He is their primary suspect, and they actually felt that they had enough evidence to arrest him. They had an eyewitness account. They had a scratch across his face. So they arrested him. But the question would become, did they have enough evidence to make a real case? Well, remember, they had evidence they collected from the crime scene. So they had a pair of black latex gloves, a plastic container that both had blood on them. They also found a pillow with a bullet hole through it in Lenel's car. This was in the garage. So this suggests that a pillow had been used as a silencer when someone shot Lenel in the back of the head.
Would a pillow silence a bullet?
Yes, it absolutely could.
Okay.
I'm not saying it always does, but absolutely. And I don't mean completely silences. It just dulls the noise.
Mm-hmm.
The police collected that area rug in the car, which also contained a bloody footprint on it, which had also clearly been removed from the living room in the house, and the hair instruments used for weaving. Remember, this was all in the garage, so some of that I told you was initially processed. Later on, they found more, but this is a lot of evidence, a lot of blood. But this was odd. Why was all this evidence, and why was Lenel's body in the garage?
Because she was trying to run away?
Well, I mean, it's possible. Luminol showed blood in the living room that dragged from the living room across the house into the garage. So
okay.
The garage was not the primary crime scene, but the secondary one. And yes, it could have been, had it not been for the rug, we might have assumed possibly that she ran, although a later autopsy would show that the bullet to her head killed her quickly, instantly. Mm-hmm. But with the rug, it seemed that someone had dragged her. But why drag her to the garage and leave her there? This is a question, one of the questions they want to answer, and I think it'll be answered later on, possibly.
I have a theory.
Okay, go ahead.
Maybe the plan was to put her in a car and then dispose of the body, but something happened that plan got thwarted.
So smart, Amy. So smart. Smart and beautiful. She's got it all. Okay. They also found, they had a shell casing as well, likely from the gun that had killed Lenel. It was one shot. But would this evidence indict Lewis? Well, they had to now look at his alibi. Remember, he claims that he was with Lorraine's boyfriend for part of the time, that he had gone to various auto shops. So this story should have been easily verifiable. Well, Lewis also had receipts that were time-stamped, which doesn't necessarily mean that he's the one who got those receipts.
If they have surveillance that can back it up. Then.
Well, it turns out that Lewis was on camera near 3 p.m. at an auto parts store and an auto repair store in L.A., which is about 65 to 70 miles away from the crime scene at the very time Lorraine said she thought she saw him running from Lenel's home.
Okay, so let's look at Ike.
Well, so question is, had Lorraine gotten it wrong also and assumed the man in the house was Lewis?
It sounds like it. I mean, that's a pretty solid alibi.
It was a pretty solid alibi. And I said, I'm sorry, that he was on camera at the exact same time she saw him running. He was on camera at 3 p.m., which was not the time she would have seen him running, but he was on camera again, I believe, closer to the time where Lorraine said she saw him running. So it wasn't just one surveillance. He had multiple places and multiple timestamps. So, okay, at this point, also, just so you know, as they're going through this case, Lewis had been in jail for a month. So we're a month in and he's being held. When the police verified his alibi and felt that he was no longer a suspect, he was released, and Lewis was seemingly grateful to be released. But then the question is, who killed Lenel? Could it have been Ike?
Well, my one question is going to be, does Ike look anything like Lewis?
I don't think they looked alike. I mean, they are, I'd say, both black males around the same age. However, Ike, I think, was definitely stockier. And if I recall from looking at the photo, I don't think Ike had hair. I think he was bald or had a shaved head. And Lewis was thinner and did have hair. So I wouldn't say that they looked alike. But if you recall, Ike had said that he had called the police concerned for Lenel's safety. He was willing to speak with the police. But what about his alibi? And could it have been him, yes, that Lorraine saw?
Did Lorraine ever meet Ike?
She didn't meet him, no.
Okay.
Ike lived out of town, and they saw each other when he was in town. He was a flight nurse, so I think when he maybe had flights there,
Gotcha.
he saw her. I don't know how frequent it was. Lorraine was interviewed again about leaving during that fight with Lewis. She said again, when I left was around 1:30 in the afternoon when they originally got into the argument, and then when she returned around 6 p.m., that's when she found Lenel, and that's when she thought she saw Lewis fleeing the home. But it was interesting because that would mean that she was gone for 5 hours, and it was a really hot day in the park where she said that she was waiting. It was like very high temperatures. Police were kind of like, maybe she has the time wrong. You know what I'm saying? Because would she have been in the park for that long that day? Maybe there's another explanation.
I'm also wondering, does she have something to do with this?
That's a question as well. So they're thinking, is Lorraine involved? What about Ike? Are these two in it together? Do they know each other? As you said, they did not know each other. And as it turns out, Amy, Ike did have an alibi. He was on a job interview, and that could be verified.
Yeah. Okay, so
they're going to Lorraine now. All right, was something strange with Lorraine? Was she incorrect, or was something else going on?
Yeah.
Well, there were a couple of strange things. When Lanelle's mother, Bobby, was at the police station, Lorraine hugged her and said how sorry she was. But later on, Bobby asked the detectives who the woman was who hugged her, saying that she didn't know her. The police said they were surprised because Bobby and Lorraine were supposedly best friends from high school. Wouldn't it be odd that Bobby wouldn't know her daughter's best friend? Maybe they weren't as good of friends as Lorraine thought they were. Well, it turns out that there were a couple other things that were odd with Lorraine. Now that Lewis also and Ike had airtight alibis, it was Lorraine's story that the police really began to focus on. And when they dug further into it, it sort of began to fall apart. Turns out Lorraine owned a gun, the police discovered, and it was the same caliber that had killed Lenel.
This begs the question, what is the relationship like between these two?
Right. Why would she kill her best friend since high school? Yeah. Well, the answer was chilling. It turns out Lorraine hadn't known Lenel from high school. Barely knew Lenel at all. They had only met weeks before Lenel's murder.
Okay, this is very shady.
Yes. The two met online on Craigslist through a personal ad for women seeking women. It was a romantic relationship then, which was a big surprise to everyone. But it had...
Even Lewis. Lewis didn't know that his girlfriend was seeing women.
Absolutely not. And the relationship quickly fizzled out, with Lenel telling Lorraine she really wanted to make it work with Lewis, but she still wanted to be friends. And so it was. The pair would be friends. But was that the end of the story?
No, I don't think it was. It sounds like maybe she had more feelings. Lorraine had more feelings.
Yeah, the police agreed. After months of investigation, they were ready to arrest Lorraine for the murder of Lenel. But there was one big problem. Lorraine was gone.
Oh, she fled?
With Lewis and Ike cleared and with the police...
Oh, I thought you were saying she left with Lewis and Ike. And I'm like, okay, no.
Sorry, no. Okay. With Lewis and Ike cleared, I think Lorraine realized, and the police asking her more questions about her story, challenging her, she realized that she was a suspect, and she fled.
She have a criminal history, this one?
So interestingly, I was like digging around. I was trying so hard to find this. I could not find any criminal history, which does not mean she didn't have it. However,
Mhm.
I think that I also looked at like an appeal really quickly. I looked at the case text and other documents. I feel like if she had anything substantial, I would have seen that,
Yeah.
especially if it was violent. It's possible she had small, petty criminal history, but I don't think anything major unless I really missed it. And I don't think so.
And was she around the same age?
Lorraine was around the same age,
Mhm.
yeah. Not
Okay.
not so significant age difference. She was definitely in her late 20s.
Mhm.
The police think now that they have a cold-blooded killer on the run. So what do? Well, what do you do when you're looking for a fugitive and you want to publicize it in a major way?
America's Most Wanted?
Exactly. They
Oh,
called him.
fun.
They called
What
America's
what
Most
year is
Wanted.
this?
This was 2011. Yep.
Okay, I don't know, like, is that show's not still on, is it?
America's Most Wanted, it went off for a little bit and then came
Mhm.
back with John Walsh, who
Mhm.
had starred in it. He brought in his son to work the show
Oh.
with him. So
Oh,
I think
cool.
there was a hiatus, but I think it's back. And I know that Paul Holes was also on it for a little bit. He might have
Yes,
been a
okay.
guest on it. So with the case featured on America's Most Wanted, the police got a tip. And the tip was that Lorraine was living in Belize for quite some time.
Ooh,
Yeah,
fancy.
she chose a good location. But
Yeah.
that life was over now. The police found her. She was arrested and brought back to the United States to face charges of murder. It was a couple of years later. I'm not sure if there was jurisdictional stuff going on and other major motions, but it wasn't until August of 2015 that the trial against Lorraine began. The prosecution laid out their theory, and here it was. Lorraine was a woman who was infatuated quickly with Lenel, and she wanted to begin a life with Lenel, as Lorraine had also been out of work at the time, living with her mother. She was financially distressed, and she needed a way out. Police believe, the prosecution theorized, that she saw Lenel as her meal ticket, and when Lenel broke it off, she was angry and desperate. She decided to kill Lenel, and the prosecution believed she was going to rob her on the way out. So Lenel and Lewis, remember I said their home wasn't quite set up, but they had a lot of stuff in the house, like a lot of electronics and televisions, computers, jewelry, things of that nature. So remember in that note that Lenel wrote to Lewis, that she supposedly wrote, she kind of said something
Uh-huh.
about taking a TV with her.
Ah, uh-huh.
Police theorized that Lorraine was going to take the TV and other items.
Were they able to match the handwriting?
Yes, they did a handwriting
Okay.
analysis, and
Okay.
it did show. And, handwriting analysis is subjective, but they believe they were able to show that it was Lorraine and not Lenel that wrote the letter. So the plan was to rob her on the way out. Before we get to the plan, you have to think about how cold this was. She set up a situation in which she agreed to weave her hair, and she put a gun to the back of her friend or this woman's head. I mean, this is very cold, this is very calculated, and this is very premeditated.
Yes.
The prosecution theorized that either she couldn't lift Lenel's body, it was much harder than she thought, and it was exhausting, and she was a bigger woman. She was definitely out of shape, I would say, or that she possibly was afraid that Lewis might come home early, not realizing that he wasn't coming home that evening, and that she panicked, realizing that she wasn't done cleaning the crime scene. So she pivoted, leaving the scene, and then trying to frame Lewis by writing that breakup letter, of course.
It always shocks me how people think that investigators cannot find things out.
Well, especially, I haven't even told you, the prosecution was able to show that her DNA was on the black plastic gloves, the container, the hair weaving tools. Her footprint was on the rug. The
Jeez.
bullet that was used, even though they couldn't find her gun, they theorized that she disposed of it. The bullet matched the gun that Lorraine owned.
Okay. So they had a ton of evidence.
They had a ton of evidence. It was a strong case. So what would the defense argue? Well, of course, I don't know how they were arguing this, but they did try to argue that Lewis was the real perpetrator, that he had the motive and a history of violence, and that perhaps there was enough time for him to get back.
No, it's ridiculous.
They pointed to the fact that Lorraine had no real motive, that she barely knew Lenel and didn't see a long-term relationship. In fact, Lorraine had a boyfriend of her own and was dating other people as well. So they said, how serious could she have taken this? The evidence against her was simply too strong. And the jury found Lorraine guilty of murder and
Not
guilty
surprised.
of using a firearm during the murder, and sentenced her to 2 25-year to life sentences to run consecutively, which means she'd be serving 50 years to life in prison.
Mm-hmm.
No surprise there. But an interesting twist, I thought, when I was listening to this case, I went,
Yeah.
whoa, I didn't see that coming. It also reminds me of Pam Hupp. Remember that Pam Hupp, the thing about Pam? She killed her friend Betsy and tried to frame her husband,
Yes.
who actually did spend time in prison. So I sort of thought of that. All right, well, where are we now? Lorraine is serving her sentence in the California Institution for Women. Her first appeal was denied. Lewis went on to get married and have a child. And as we know, his life could have taken a very different course should he have been wrongfully convicted. Thankfully, he wasn't, and I'd say due to solid police work and luck that he was on surveillance. Lenel's friends remember her electric smile. They recall what a compassionate woman she was, and someone who accomplished so much and whose life was needlessly, so senselessly cut short. But why? This one is also a hard one. Criminologically, this one is a hard one for someone who barely knew Lenel. This wasn't an investment.
What do we know about Lorraine?
So that's the thing. I don't know enough about her. What I do know about her was that she was kind of down on her luck. She was out of work. So I believe she worked I think she did hair for a living in some capacity. I'm not sure, but hair weaving and other types. I know she did it part-time on the side, but she was out of work. She was living with her mother. She didn't have any money. She had an unstable relationship. It seems that Lorraine, to me, it seemed that she wanted Lenel to be hers at first, right? But then after that, I think Lorraine also was very jealous of Lenel. So I'll tell you one thing we do know. After Lenel was murdered, and when Lorraine was dating other people, she told people her name was Crystal, and that was Lenel's middle name. She told people that she was a nurse and that she drove a BMW. And guess what? Lenel was a nurse who drove a BMW. So it seemed to me that she was trying to assume Lenel's identity. So what began as jealousy about Lenel's relationship morphed into jealousy about Lenel's lifestyle, I think. As we know, people commit crime when they experience a disconnect between their goals and the means to achieve them.
Enemy theory. Ding,
Yes,
ding, ding.
of course.
I also see general strain theory.
Yes, well, absolutely. But Lorraine had no stable career, no financial security. She saw Lenel as her ticket to a better life. I think when that was taken away, she took matters into her own hands. So yes, this is definitely strain theory in various different types of strain theory, because as we know, strain theory can be tied to financial goals and success, but it can also be tied to failure and loss and the stress and anger and frustration people feel who are unable to cope, right?
Yeah, it seems like losing Lenel was loss of a positive stimuli and lacking the proper coping mechanisms to deal with that loss. She turned to crime.
I feel like Lorraine also may have had an identity disturbance, whereby I see like she had an unstable self-identity. And I think that led her to adopt the characteristics of someone more successful, someone who she envied. So I see bits of that as well, and that would link into personality disorder. But in the end, Amy, this is also rational choice. I mean, Lorraine planned this. She made sure Lewis would be away. She staged the crime scene. She wrote a fake breakup letter. This wasn't really a crime of passion, as some might say, but a crime of calculation. She thought she could manipulate the system.
No, as you said, it was definitely premeditated. There's plenty of evidence to support that.
It's so interesting to me that her rational choice had totally irrational consequences.
Yes.
I think at the end of the day, this is about, no matter what the theory, regardless of the theory we use to explain it, this is about as cold of a crime as it gets, and certainly senseless. Did I miss anything on that one, you think?
Her theory? No, like you said, without knowing a lot about Lorraine's background, it's hard to try and theorize about what happened here.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the criminal justice system. Very interesting. So a man in this case, Lewis, was arrested based on the eyewitness account and with a history of controlling behavior, a scratch on his face. It was just easy to believe that he was the killer.
And like you said, this could have easily been a wrongful conviction. Had the surveillance cameras been broken at the store, he might be in prison right now.
I think, yes, had it not been for surveillance, so a little bit of luck on his side. I'd also say the detectives did not seem like, even though they believed they had evidence, it seemed like they were very interested in investigating further. I think they realized quickly that something wasn't quite, something was amiss. However, without the evidence of where Lewis was, if he didn't have a strong alibi, what would have happened?
Also, this is a good example of good police work where they did not have confirmation bias and they did not have tunnel vision and they kept the options open.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's exactly what it is. So I'll leave it at that, what you said. Now, unfortunately for Lenel, the outcome is unchanged for her family, right? A bright, compassionate woman was stolen from them, and no court ruling is going to bring her back. At the very least, the right person is behind bars, and I'd say Lenel's legacy isn't one of mistaken justice. Rather, it's one of the truth prevailing.
Yes. What a good case, Meghan. There were two people, like I would have guessed her. This also just shows how quick we just assume it's the boyfriend or the lover. And not always.
And that was a big reason why I picked this case, is because I went, this is, these assumptions that we go with, they do lead to, unfortunately, wrongful blame, wrongful convictions. So it was one of the reasons I chose this case.
Good.
And
Very
it was interesting.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Amy. And thank you to everyone else for listening. And we'll catch you next time on Women in Crime. Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonso. And music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime. Sources for today's episode include Dateline, Oxygen.com, LATimes.com, NBC.com, and an episode of Minds of Madness.